Yo, what's up? Welcome back to another episode of the SWAS NFL Week 14. We got the Falcons on the road in Minnesota. Let's do it.
Hey, get the SWAS.
All right, like I said, we got Atlanta on the road in Minnesota. The Vikings are now laying 5.5 across the board. This number was at 4.5. It's been moved up to 5.5. Total sitting at 45.5 pretty much across the board as well. Take a look at the pie charts, and according to the data, action's coming in pretty split on this one, about 50-50 on the tickets, about 55% of the money coming in on the Vikings. As I always say, take this data with a grain of salt. So let's get into this matchup, and we'll start with some trends. Atlanta has not handled the Vikings well. In their last 6 matchups against Minnesota, they're 1-5 straight up, 1-5 against the spread. Also, trending hard to the under here for both these teams. On the season, the Falcons are 4-8 to the under. Minnesota is also 4-8 to the under. In fact, they're tied for the 2 most under-heavy teams so far this year. There's actually 6 teams tied at 4-8 to the under. These are 2 of them. Minnesota's also 1-5 to the under in their home games this year. So if you're a person that's into trends, you might want to look at the under. So let's match these 2 teams up on the field. We'll start with the Falcons offense against the Vikings defense. Not as big of a mismatch as you may have thought. I think a lot of us look at this game, they're like, how's the Falcons offense going to move the ball here? Well, Atlanta does have some nice looking offensive numbers on the season. They're 11th in yards per play, 8th in success rate. Passing numbers, 9th in yards per pass attempt, 11th in success rate per dropback. Rushing, 16th and 7th. So the Falcons have been putting up some offensive numbers. The problem is most of those were earlier in the season. The last couple of games, pretty ugly from the Falcons offensively here. Minnesota, as we know, top 5 defense on the year. You don't need me to tell you that. Now, one thing I will say for the Falcons offense is I think a lot of people are looking at this matchup thinking there's no way Atlanta can run the ball on the Vikings defense. Vikings have maybe the best run defense in the NFL, but we have to keep in mind that there's no Pace. Ivan Pace Jr. is out for this game, and you might be thinking, who cares? It's one player. Well, actually, according to Pro Football Focus, this is one of the most important defensive pieces against the run in the NFL. He's rated 7th in the league in run defense grade, 1st in run stopping percentage. So this is an important piece if you're trying to stop the run, and we've seen the Vikings play one game without Pace, and they got run on. In the 5 games before last week, they were allowing 3.27 yards per carry, under 70 rushing yards per game, success rate per rush under 25%. Look at last week, 154 yards rushing, almost 5 yards a carry for the Cardinals. So maybe not having Pace on the field matters for this Viking run defense. Also, Atlanta runs a lot of zone blocking schemes. In fact, they run more zone blocking schemes than any other offense in the NFL. They're first in zone run frequency. That plays right into the weakness of this Vikings defense. They're one of the best defenses in the NFL against gap concept blocking schemes. Against zone runs, 16th in yards per carry. Also, as good as this Vikings defensive line has been, and it's been great, they're 9th in adjusted line yards, 1st in run defense grade, 2nd in yards before contact. We do have to give some credit to the Falcons offensive line. That offensive line's been great this year, 16th, 6th, and 12th. So it's not like they're completely outmatched here in terms of generating push in the run game. Here's where it gets tough, because at this point, I'm like, hey, maybe the Falcons could run the ball in this game. No one's expecting the Falcons to run it. There's no Pace. Maybe Atlanta could run the ball in this game. Here's where it gets tough. The last 2 games have been ugly for the Falcons trying to run the ball. In the 5 games before that, 5.1 yards per carry, 156 rushing yards per game, 54% success rate per rush. In their last 2 games against the Broncos and Chargers, 83 rushing yards per game, 2.9 yards per carry, success rate down below 31%. Now you can say, well, Kyle, they played the Broncos and Chargers, 2 great defenses. Okay, but what do you think the Vikings is? The Vikings are also a great defense. So I don't know, even without Pace, it's just really tough to have faith in the Falcons run game after what we've seen the last 2 games. So as a whole, even though I do think the Vikings run defense might be a little vulnerable right now with the injury, I still don't think we can trust the Falcons to run the ball in this game, which means there's going to be a lot of pressure on old Mr. Cousins. So why don't we look at the matchup for Kirk Cousins here? And I actually have a positive angle for Kirk Cousins. The Vikings are elite at taking away the short pass. They're 3rd in DVOA against the short pass. Why is that a positive angle for Kirk Cousins? He doesn't throw many short passes. C+ frequency, 40.9%. He actually throws a lot of intermediate passes, which on paper is the weakest passing depth for this Vikings defense. So, okay, there's something if you're trying to back Kirk Cousins in the revenge game. Here's the problem with that. Basically, every other angle for Kirk Cousins after that one is negative. First of all, we got the Vikings pass rush. They're 1st in blitz rate, 7th in pressure rate, 9th in adjusted sack sack rate. We know Brian Flores knows how to put pressure on the quarterback. Now, Kirk Cousins has made some throws under pressure. He's actually 7th in yards per attempt. He's also 13th in pressure to sack rate, so it's not all bad. But look at the passer rating. 64.5 passer rating when pressured, and the turnover-worthy play rate is terrifying, 7.9%. That's 39th in the NFL. So you put pressure on Kirk Cousins, as we saw last week against the Chargers, he puts the football in harm's way. That's a terrifying number there. Also, we mentioned that the Vikings are first in blitz rate. You can see in the top right here, Vikings first in blitz rate. Nobody blitzes more than Brian Flores in the league so far this year. Kirk Cousins, much better when not blitzed, although the turnover-worthy play rate is pretty concerning whether he's blitzed or not. It's pretty bad on both sides, but you can see completion percentage, yards per attempt, passer rating, all much better when he's not blitzed. Brian Flores is most definitely going to be blitzing. As far as the Vikings coverages go, they run a lot of too-high safety looks. In fact, they're first in too-high safety frequency. They also run a ton of cover 2, third in cover 2 frequency. Both of these numbers are bad news for Kirk Cousins. He's been much better against single high safeties. You can see passer rating, turnover-worthy play rate against single high safety looks 16th and 28th. Against two high safeties, 29th and 33rd. Definitely don't like that. And also, they run a lot of cover 2. Kirk Cousins, awful numbers trying to throw the ball in cover 2. 27th in yards per attempt, 36th in passer rating, 35th in turnover-worthy play rate. So it started off looking like it might be a decent matchup for Kirk Cousins, but the deeper we look, the more it looks like a nightmare for old Kirk Cousins. Also, this Falcons offense, like I mentioned before, 2 terrible games in a row. We were talking specifically about their run game, but it applies across the board. In their first 10 games, they were averaging 23.8 points per game, 6.6 yards per play, 52.7% success rate. In their last 2 games, under 10 points per game, 9.5 points per game, 4.8 yards per play. Success rate is significantly down as well. And again, you can say, well, Kyle, they played the Broncos and Chargers. The Vikings defense, even without pace, might be better than both those teams. I mean, the Vikings have one of the best defenses in the NFL. We also have kind of a pattern forming here when it comes to the Falcons offense. They kind of seem to be doing all of their damage against bad defenses. Against top 16 defenses, they're averaging just 15.4 points per game. Against bottom 16 defenses, 29.8 points per game. Now, the yards per play and success rate is actually a little bit closer, but no question, this offense has done most of their scoring damage against the bottom 16 defenses. The Vikings are most definitely not a bottom 16 defense. I mean, look at the passing production. Against bottom 16 defenses, over 292 passing yards per game, a 118.9 average passer rating. Against top 16 defenses, it drops to a 72.5. Yes, the interceptions probably have a lot to do with that, but still definitely concerning if you're trying to back Kirk Cousins here. As a whole, on this side of the ball, I have to say, I don't like this for the Falcons offensively. I want it to be sharp. I wanted to be like, oh, Kirk Cousins revenge game. Ivan Pace Jr. is out. Falcons are going to be able to run the ball. There's just not enough here. This is a really bad matchup for Kirk Cousins, and I think it's going to be ugly for the Falcons offense in this game. But what about the matchup on the other side? Let's take a look at the matchup for the Vikings offensively. Obviously, on paper, this is looking like a pretty favorable matchup. They're 12th in yards per play on the season, 11th in success rate. Falcons defense, 19th and 22nd. So solid start here for the Vikings offensively. We had that one game in Jacksonville. It was week 10 on the road against the Jags, where the Vikings offense just looked terrible. They scored 12 points in that. I think they won 12. Yes, it was 12-7. I know that because I got Vikings minus 4.5. I won by the hook. So they won that game 12-7. The offense didn't look good at all. 5.2 yards per play. Passing attack numbers were down 6.3 yards per attempt, 48.2 passer rating. Sam Darnold was throwing some picks, and a lot of people, including myself, were like, the Vikings offensive magic is over. Sam Darnold's going to come crashing back down to earth. This is the beginning of the end for Sam Darnold. Well, they've bounced back since then. In their 3 games since that Jacksonville game, 25.3 points per game, 6.4 yards per play, success rate over 54%. Passing numbers are looking elite again. 275 passing yards per game, 8.4 yards per attempt, 67.4% success rate per dropback, passer rating up close to 112. So Sam Darnold shut us up pretty quickly. And this should be a pretty favorable matchup for Sam Darnold at home against a Falcons pass defense that hasn't been very good this year. We do have to mention, though, that the Falcons actually played great defense against Justin Herbert last week. Now, it was a perfect spot. The Falcons were coming off a bye week at home against a Chargers team that just played back-to-back tough games, then had to fly across the country for a non-conference NFC game. So it was a beautiful spot for the Falcons. We still have to give them credit, though. They played great defense. They held Justin Herbert, who's been red hot. 150 passing yards in the game, 6.3 yards per attempt, 87.2 passer rating. So this Falcons defense definitely looked better last week than we probably have seen them look most of the year. Here's where I get a bit worried for Atlanta's defense, though. They run a lot of cover 3, 36% of their defensive snaps, 6th most in the NFL. Sam Darnold has excellent numbers throwing on cover 3 so far this year. 6th in completion percentage, 3rd in yards per attempt, 9th in pass rating, 2nd in big time throw rate. He's had no problems throwing the ball in cover 3 so far this year. So at home, definitely like the matchup here for Sam Darnold against a lot of cover 3. Now, we do have to mention that the Falcons might be getting Mike Hughes back at corner. He hasn't played in about a month, so that would be nice to have him back. And I believe that would be the first time the Falcons defense is fully healthy this entire season. So that's something, but this is still not a Falcons defense I really believe in. So going on the road to Minnesota, running a bunch of cover 3 against Sam Darnold and those receivers, not exactly a matchup I love. I will say, though, this Falcons defensive front out of nowhere. I mean, in weeks 2 through 9, right, there were 8 games in there, an 8-game sample size. They're allowing 5 yards per carry, over 134 rushing yards per game. In their last 3 games, they're allowing 87 rushing yards per game, 4 yards per carry, success rate per rush under 38%. So out of nowhere, this Falcons run defense is looking pretty good. And keep in mind, Falcons had a great run defense last year. I think they were top 3. So this was a great run defense last year. It wouldn't be crazy to believe that this Falcons defense is going to be pretty solid against the run down the stretch. So that is something to keep an eye on. And remember, this Vikings offense hasn't been able to run the ball in forever. In weeks 5 through 11, that's a 6-game sample size. They were averaging under 4 yards per carry, 31.2% success rate per rush. In their last 2 games, it's up at 4.7 yards per carry. They played the Bears and the Cardinals, 2 less than stellar run defenses. The Vikings run game is not a unit I trust at all. This offense works by Sam Darnold making downfield throws, not the run game. So the Falcons, with this newly found run defense, I actually think they are able to take the run away from Minnesota. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on Sam Darnold, but at home against cover 3, I trust Sam Darnold to make some throws. It's a matter of whether or not he throws picks or not. I think Sam Darnold could play well. So where does that leave me in terms of placing a bet? Well, I can tell you the angle I feel most comfortable with is the Vikings blitz packages against Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins does not look right. Everyone keeps talking about this. He's not planning right. Prop Beaver's been saying it all season. Loves to say Kirk Cousins can't plant. Starting to look like he might be right in that respect. So Brian Flores sending all those extra rushers at Kirk Cousins. He struggles against the pass rush. He struggles against the blitz. Falcons haven't been able to run the ball. I just can't have any faith in the Falcons offense here on the road. So that would definitely point me over towards the Minnesota side. I lean Vikings minus 4.5. Also like the under. I think I might like the under a bit more at 45.5, or Falcons team total under. I see a 20.5 here at minus 130. So that's the way I'm going with this one. Vikings minus 4.5, under 45.5, Falcons team total under 20.5. I'll probably end up betting some combination of that. So leaning towards the Minnesota side in this one. If you want to see all the bets I currently have open for the weekend, head over to KyleKirms.com and click on open bets. You'll see all mine as well as everyone else on the staff here. Make sure you catch the live streams. Remember to bet responsibly this weekend. Hit me up in the Discord if you need me.